I really like to be a part of disruptive technology. And I think what we're building at Auror on the law enforcement side is truly going to disrupt the way law enforcement operates. And I think going from that, nuisance crime to combating this, and I strongly believe that when law enforcement pays attention to the retail crime threat, that'll have a halo effect on all the other crime in their communities. And I think it's a great opportunity to really impact the communities we serve.
You're listening to the Retail Crime Intelligence Podcast by Auror, where we share actionable insights to help you reduce crime and violence in your stores.
So first off, before we actually hand this over to Bobby, let me go ahead and introduce everybody. So most of you probably already know Bobby Haskins. He is going to be moderating today's panel. He is the VP of Retail Partnerships at Auror. We also have Rob Wolf joining us today. Rob is the Senior Director of Public Safety Solutions at Auror. And last, certainly not least, we have Raul Aguilar, who is the Senior Director of Law Enforcement Partnerships at Auror. So I'm going to go ahead and kick this off and hand it over to Bobby to start today's webinar.
I appreciate everyone jumping on, spending, the half hour to 45 minutes with us here. And really what we want to walk through today is obviously introduce a couple of the auras that we have on the call, but really talk about how at Auror we see this data network effect and it takes a network to defeat a network concept evolving and going forward to make sure we can actually reduce crime in the communities. And law enforcement is a massive part of that equation, and bridging the gap between retail and law enforcement is critical to have any success in that space. And I have two, what I would say, experts on with me, and they're teaching me new stuff every single day as a retailer and an LP practitioner at heart. Not very familiar with the law enforcement space, but these two individuals are leveling me up. So as we go throughout the half hour, we'll talk a lot about how we see the connections or the nexus between retail and law enforcement. Without further ado, I'm going to stop talking and start asking questions because I have the easy job today. And we're going to turn it over. And Rob, I'm actually going to start with you because we've got the mayor on the other side there, Raul, and I think most people on the call know who he is. So we'll go second with him. But, Rob, for the starting point, for the retail community and hopefully some law enforcement on the call, can you give us a brief introduction of who you are and then what you're doing for Auror?
Certainly. Thanks, Bobby. Great to be here. Great to be with everyone. My name is Rob Wolf. I'm the Senior Director of Law Enforcement Solutions. So my role at Auror is to build out our future law enforcement solutions and to usher in that next generation of solutions we're going to bring to market, serving directly to law enforcement customers, but also to work hand in hand with our retail partners in increasing the effectiveness of law enforcement actions and helping be able to solve crimes. So been working in the public safety space for about 25 years. Started off shortly after 9/11, starting my own business, and that led in the emergency management space and large-scale event planning and disaster planning. So we helped things like the inaugurations, presidential details, RNC, DNC, Super Bowls, planning and managing large-scale events. And then roughly about 10 years ago, my journey into true crime fighting started following one of my mentors from the Tampa Police Department built a solution called Street Smart that was an intel platform for crime fighting. And that really sparked a passion in me for helping to solve crimes, and joined Auror about 4 months ago now. And again, my role is helping to build out those future solutions and taking all of the fantastic technology we have on the retail side and applying that on the law enforcement side.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. I appreciate you joining the team and bringing that expertise. We'll talk a little bit more as we go forward around why Auror and kind of some of your thinking of making that transition. But I want to give, as we have started to call him internally here at Auror, the mayor, an opportunity to introduce himself. I'm sure most people on the call know who Mr. Raul Aguilar is. But Raul, why don't you introduce yourself, talk a little bit about your background, talk a little bit about, what you're doing to support law enforcement and retailers here at Auror.
Yeah, Bobby, thank you very much. Thank you to the Loss Prevention Foundation for this opportunity. Just wrapped up a 25-and-a-half-year career as a special agent, a public servant with Department of Homeland Security. Initially started with the U.S. Customs Service. For the last 2.5 to 3 years, focused primarily on organized retail crime and the larger initiative under the auspices of financial crime. HSI is the largest investigative arm for the Department of Homeland Security. We have a lot of resources, and looking at it from the lens of the money laundering, the illicit finance, our leadership gave us a lot of latitude, and we were able to become pretty much subject matter experts from a lot of the people that are on this call today, taking us under their wing, the retailers, the foundations, teaching us and helping us understand our authorities, and then having us develop our pillars and then going out to the community and making an impact by, just sharing our knowledge, offering up resources, and helping to bring these cases to bear. Currently in my role, I'm the Senior Director of Law Enforcement Partnerships. I see it as an extension of what I was doing at Homeland Security. I happen to be in this great position just doing some of the same kind of work, right? Connecting people, bringing down silos, educating the retailers and law enforcement about what I call is the beautiful magic of Auror, right? The intelligence that sits there to be had, to be shared, and to make communities safer. So I'll go into that of why I joined a little bit later. But again, thank you, Bobby, for the opportunity. Looking forward to it, and see if you can make me laugh here a couple times.
Well, I'll try my best, maybe bring in some dad jokes as we go throughout. That's my jam lately. I think, Raul, it's probably a perfect segue, and I'll turn it over to you, of like storied career in federal law enforcement, serving your country, both here and abroad, all the different things you did, and really put your stake in the ground and led an initiative here in the U.S. to prioritize organized retail crime and build collaboration across all of the law enforcement sectors that, try to keep, and day in and day out, keep our communities safe. What made the shift? You went from, federal agency, government, I'll say it, red tape, right? There's lots of structure. I can say that. And then now you're at a tech company, man. You're unfortunately, you have to work for me, Captain Curveball over here. But what made the shift? What drove you to make that change, and why?
Yeah, so I was going to make a joke about I've always wanted to work in tech. So of course I joined Auror. That's my daughter's way of breaking the ice. I will make a joke about that later. But in full seriousness, I saw what was happening with Auror. I saw that the primary mission was to make communities safer, to make stores safer, to make patrons working there or going to the store safer. And then the main mission of sharing intelligence from one platform with structured data that could be used to prosecute cases and put bad guys in jail. So that when I saw that mission, I said, you know what, I have to be part of this. And as I got to know the team and the culture and the fun that you folks were having, I said, if I can do anything to be part of this and add some of my background and experience to help do that in a faster way, that I got to be part of that. But I will tell you, inside in my stomach, it's kind of cool to tell people, hey, I work in tech. Of course I can work from home and use Slack and go on Notion and Bob this and Slack that. I think we made a joke about it the last time, but it's pretty darn cool. And the people that we're getting to meet as we continue to build those coalitions of the willing that I call, it's really great to see that. And I think that's the primary reason I joined.
Awesome. Thanks, Raul. And I know, there's other perks, right? You got to go down to New Zealand a couple weeks, celebrate your anniversary with your, beautiful wife down in, a beautiful country. So there's lots of perks outside of, Slack, Notion, and all the different tools we use at this tech company. I think the biggest thing for me, Raul, is you have a passion for connecting individuals, and that same passion, we have the opportunity at Auror to take that hopefully to the next level and really impact at a national and hopefully a global scale around this crime problem that we're facing on the retail side and the law enforcement side. So I appreciate that ethos that you've had as an individual and how we're able to harness that a bit here at Auror. So thank you. And Rob, going over to you, started a few businesses, been in a few different spaces. So you've had the tech side, the scale up side, the building of solutions side in your career. So what interested you in Auror? And I know you've got a few year journey of making your way here in Auror, but why Auror, and what was different? What did you see that was different at Auror than any other solution out there that make the jump over here?
Yeah, so first, I think Auror hiring Raul and I just want to say I think there was a need to get some more gray hair or less hair in the organization. So that's a key reason why we were brought in. But you're right, Bobby. I've been watching Auror for about 4 years now and watching the growth of the company. And 4 years ago, when I first started talking to the leaders at Auror, I didn't feel like retail crime had the right attention from U.S. law enforcement. I think it was considered a nuisance crime more than anything else, and a victimless crime. I think that attitude certainly is changing and is growing, the recognition of how important retail crime is and how big it is and how interconnected it is. I think your comment earlier of building a network to combat a network, that's really what drew me in. And then seeing the data that Auror has and the amount of information that we have, and more importantly, probably the amount of information that's not making it into law enforcement's hands. I know you have some stats around the size of this problem, but, I think I really like to be a part of disruptive technology. And I think what we're building at Auror on the law enforcement side is truly going to disrupt the way law enforcement operates. And I think going from that, nuisance crime to combating this. And I strongly believe that when law enforcement pays attention to the retail crime threat, that'll have a halo effect on all the other crime in their communities. And I think it's a great opportunity to really impact the communities we serve. And, I think it's a twofold problem. How do we get retailers to provide law enforcement better information, actionable information? And then how do we get law enforcement to actually take that action and to address that problem in a huge way? And that's exciting. The entrepreneur in me, gets excited about creating new opportunity and solving those big world problems.
Awesome. Rob and Raul, I appreciate that. I think I flipped it up today, and I usually start with personal and outside of work. But I went with, let's talk about, who you are and your roles at Auror, what you've done in the past. And now I'm going to go opposite, and I'm going off script. I'm not following any guidelines like I usually do. Rob, why don't you just new face to the industry. Just talk a little bit about Rob outside of work, talk about family, tell me about your passions outside of work, and then we'll get back into the business. So
sounds good. Appreciate it. I am the husband to a wonderful wife, Cheryl. We've been married for about 1.5 years now, so we're still in our honeymoon phase. Love to travel the world. We have 3 adult kids, so we're empty nesters, and we're at that great point where all of the kids have now realized that mom and dad are probably a little bit smarter than they thought, and they're coming back home to ask advice, but they go away at the end, and so wonderful. We have a 1-year-old puppy who's probably running around here somewhere and will make an appearance at some point, but other than that, life is good, and just joining Auror and just having a heck of a time.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. And Raul, over to you. Talk a little bit about Raul outside of Auror and HSI.
Well, your timing's perfect. Today's my wife's birthday. So today Raul will be cleaning house, making sure the dishes are ready, and hopefully have a place for dinner takeout as she's working late tonight. Blessed to be married 25 years to the same wonderful woman, 3 children that are finding their way in this world, 2 almost out of college and 1 still in college. What else? Playing a lot of scratch in the sense where I'm scratching the 100 plus on the scorecard.
Yeah.
So those that are not that have seen me golf on this podcast, they know I'm not a scratch golfer. But really, just
not one to bet against either.
I might be able to come up on 1 hole, Rob. Bobby's seen me play at Top Golf. What else? Just blessed to the position. I think Rob keyed on something. A lot of these agencies, a lot of retailers sitting on a treasure trove of information. If we can do anything, if I can do anything by showing a historical example, by briefing somebody about how it was done in a former agency, even if it wasn't HSI and I know about it, if we can even talk about an example where the retailer can come to us and become an Auror champion, is how did you share that information and why was it successful in that city? And try to duplicate that. That's what I try to do when I'm not enjoying the family time, Bobby. So there's my intro for personal.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And please send the birthday wishes to your beautiful bride for me. And funny story for those that are on the call that haven't heard this, the first time I ever met Raul's wife, the first thing she said to me is she looked at me and she goes, "You're not old enough to be anyone's boss." And I was like, "I appreciate you, and you are my new best friend." So it's been awesome to have both of you join and bring the knowledge that you both bring, both inside of work and what you do in your career plus outside. Especially for this guy who's in the trenches with a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and on the exact opposite side you two are when it comes to the the parenting world. So appreciate all your advice. So, and I'm sure I'll have gray hair as we go forward, and join the club. So, moving back more into it takes a network to defeat a network. And Auror, we've really prioritized retail, and it is our focus over the last 12 years and continues to be. And retail crime, we've got lots of challenges, right? It's been decriminalized. I think, one of you said it's, almost looked at as like a victimless crime in most states and jurisdictions now. You layer on COVID, you layer on some of the other things that we've seen across the country in the last few years, and it is a high reward, very little risk crime. But it's connected to a lot of other massive crimes. And I think, Rob, you call them, I think they're called Part 1 crimes out in the law enforcement space. So there's such a treasure trove of intelligence inside of the retail data for law enforcement. But I think it's also good to level set on just some of the work that's been done on the retail side. So Raul, looking at, in your past at HSI, or even recently, can you just give a good example of a time or a case or an investigation where retailers and law enforcement leveraged a network to take down a network, to take down another ORC group, and just walk through a little bit of your learnings and what you saw from that network being used against another network?
Yeah, absolutely. As I was doing research, HSI had multiple cases over the last couple of years, big ones, ones where we were the primary, ones where we were the secondary agency, and ones where we just didn't have any charges, but we did provide intelligence. And I found the one that I think is the most impactful for today's conversation because of the way that the crew operated with impunity for 30 years. So the case out of North Carolina that was taken down in October 20th, 2022, you can look up the press release. It was in North Carolina. And the other piece that really struck me was the 28 firearms that were seized at this house that were tied to an ORC ring. Real quickly, an overview of it. It had 4 different major retailers, some of them who may be on this call today, working together, sharing information. The King of the Mountain case, I think that's the actual name of the case. It was gang activity in the sense that it was organized for them to go out up and down the corridors of 95 and steal products. They got pretty aggressive with going away from selling it just in brick and mortar and or back door of a car or pawn shops. And they actually recruited a guy who was pretty tech savvy and created an online persona and started working on an e-commerce platform that we all know and started selling it. And then they really got pretty aggressive with how to launder their funds. So that case, it brought my attention. So for me to mention it today, because when I read in there that for multi-generations, the people that were arrested have been stealing and running organized retail crime initiatives or theft groups there for a period of about 30 years. So I thought that was pretty impactful. It involved HSI having to work with multiple sheriffs, multiple police departments in Carolina to get them to share the information. The case, I think, took about 2 years, 28 firearms, 20,000 rounds of ammunition. You can see photos online if you Google it. I think they recovered $167,000 in stolen merchandise in the product, but they had about a $5 million assessment of what the stolen goods were. Now, for something that's closer to what I'm doing today, and as I'm talking to retailer investigators, some of the best investigators, by the way, that I see that are tenacious, that are aggressive, with limited resources sometimes because they don't have subpoena authority, right? And they have to operate in a vacuum. I can give you one example of a case from the West Coast where a retailer was working specifically with a law enforcement organized retail crime task force. And they specifically mentioned to me a couple of weeks ago that they utilized the Auror platform, the intelligence in the platform, by inviting each other in to play in the platform to share intelligence and information and investigate, and identify targets that were operating in another state that had direct links back to that state. And that was a takedown that just happened. So there is that whole mantra of what we're talking about where it takes a network to defeat a network. What does that mean? It means you have to get uncomfortable and share your information. You have to invite people into your world to create that network and then to go after these criminals that a lot of them have been operating for years and years and years with impunity and not any fear of being arrested because of, like Rob said, sometimes those crimes are looked over and the priority at the time may be, murders and violent crime and human trafficking. So I think that those are 2 good examples of something that just came to mind as I was doing some research for this podcast book.
Awesome. Thanks, Raul. I think those couple of examples are just great to, number one, how retail crime is connected to usually larger criminal enterprises and larger problems in the communities. And if we, in order to actually reduce crime in the communities, you got to solve all of those challenges. And retail crime can be an opportunity to break open a lot of those cases and make those connections. And then I think the second piece is it's all about actionable intelligence. And if you can search for tattoos, piercings, clothing, details, names, whatever, and you can start to use, AI and some machine learning across all of that to work smarter, not harder, you can break open even more and hopefully make a bigger change in this. And I think that probably leads nicely into, Rob, we've been, at Auror, we've been focused on retail, and we, continue to focus in that space and trying to add in, new disruptive technologies, as you said at the start. From your experience, looking at and building a network and trying to build different technologies on the law enforcement side, what are some of the challenges that are facing law enforcement in this space right now? And just share with the audience what you've seen and experienced in that space.
Well, I think all across the country, retail crime is on the increase and poses a problem for law enforcement who are all across the country are also forced to do more with less. Recruiting is a huge issue right now in law enforcement, and the number of officers on the street continues to decline, or at least is being fought to keep those numbers up. And as Raul mentioned, when you're trying to prioritize the types of crimes that are occurring in your community, retail crime, I think, gets put to the bottom often and isn't addressed with the higher priority as other crimes might need to be. So I think for law enforcement, the challenge is how do we give it such an easy button that they can just look inside or see the information that's available, make the case, and go make the arrest. And that then has an impact across the board. I think the biggest challenge law enforcement faces from the retail side specifically would be, how do law enforcement wants a good quality report that includes statements, it includes evidence, and they want that submitted to them in a way that they can digest it and then action on it. And I think that's Auror's direct to law enforcement reporting allows that to happen and gives a good mechanism to do that. What we see inside Auror is not as many reports as should be are making it to law enforcement. We see most of the reports have good video, good statements, good evidence, but they're not getting all the way through to law enforcement. And so I think enabling better reporting to law enforcement will allow them to take quicker and faster action to resolve the crimes. And I think that will really have a flywheel effect. The more law enforcement gets involved, the more retailers will submit and vice versa. So as Raul said, it's everybody getting a little bit uncomfortable and sharing some information and then watching that flywheel take over and take effect.
Awesome. And then Rob, I think a kind of a follow-up question to that is, how do you see Auror moving forward playing a larger part on the law enforcement side of this? It takes a network to defeat a network and to reduce crime in the communities.
I think we have a current challenge to educate law enforcement on what we have right now available to them. So, for example, inside our solution, we have millions of records that show, patterns and crimes and if I look inside and search on any of the major metro areas and look at the crime reports that are in there, there's not only retail crime, but as you mentioned, there's aggravated assault, there's burglary, there's robbery. There's all kinds of crimes that we have really good information about that we need to ensure that law enforcement knows about and they're able to get their hands on that information. And I think we need to educate law enforcement that this information is available to them. It's available to them at no cost right now, and it allows them to immediately take action on retail crime in their communities.
Yeah, and I think and Raul can probably speak a little bit to this, but I think it's a two-way street, right? The more comfortable we get sharing intelligence, actionable intelligence with law enforcement, the more comfortable they get supporting on different cases that, they might not have picked up before, but because, you cracked open another larger case for them, they're going to pick up this investigation. And Raul, maybe you've seen some of that in your days on the law enforcement side, to just share more about that give and take and that relationship that happens with the comfort of, sharing it in the right ways.
Yeah. So before I do that, just one other thing popped up just in the last month and a half, 2 months of doing research in the Midwest with the law enforcement agency working through a fusion center, identifying a person who had been pretty much operating again for a couple of years, could not identify him, tied to assaults and violent crime was identified through Auror just because a retailer invited a law enforcement partner into some exchange and some conversations, and then they worked with the Fusion Center and were able to identify it. When you get an email from an analyst saying, hey, man, that person was not being identified for many, many years, it kind of makes you feel good. And it's the whole reason why I joined those success stories. To get people to share, it takes a lot of what HSI was doing initially. I'll talk about how we had to revamp our initiative. We go back to 2009 that we were looking at organized retail crime. We testified in Congress with the 3 other federal agencies. You could also go research that and see what iterations of things have changed in law enforcement. But it meant that we had to go and learn from the retail investigators that I mentioned, some of the best investigators that I've met, work with them to identify what other law enforcement agencies were looking at that network, what federal resources could HSI provide in a multi-jurisdiction, multi-state investigation. Maybe it's a wiretap. Maybe it's providing additional surveillance. Maybe it's using informants when you're looking at the South American theft groups that are hitting us across the country. That's where HSI with the Border Search Authority really became dominant, and always doing it with the lens of humility, of understanding the threat from the state and local perspective, right? A lot of these investigators working with the sheriff's deputies and the police departments have been looking at these crews for many, many years, and maybe they just can't put the case together because they don't have that serious piece of evidence, and that could be easily obtained through the Auror platform, as I see that coming up in the last couple months. What else could they do? Is just making themselves available to join those ORCAs, to communicate through the task forces that are established for organized retail crime, and to attend some of these events, right? I mean, we haven't mentioned it yet, but there's events coming up, and I hope people, if they're attending, would come over and visit and learn about the next iteration of where Auror is going to share intelligence faster, stronger, better, so we can make a bigger impact.
And Bobby, if I may, there was a question that came in on chat about NIBRS. So those that don't know NIBRS, that's new National Incident-Based Reporting Services, and it's the way law enforcement now reports crime. And should LP adopt as a standard? I don't think so, because I think what Auror provides right now and the reporting tools that are inside Auror, when that's done accurately and with good information, we can automatically create the NIBRS reporting for law enforcement on the back end. And that's certainly a project that we are deeply involved in and looking at for law enforcement. And how do we make that easy button so that law enforcement gets what they need? But I don't think the LP industry needs to adopt NIBRS as a mechanism at this point. I think we can do that for you all.
Spot on, Rob. I think with the technology that's out there, as you said, the auto magic, like that is a very real thing. And I think you run the risk of, if you go too far down the road with some of these, requirements at a federal level, you actually can, from a retail perspective, that's me putting my retailer hat, you can configure yourself into complexity. And that's a very dangerous road to go down, because then you start getting noise. You don't actually start getting to the root of the problem, which at the end of the day, our data shows across the U.S., there's 10% of people are responsible for 91% of the loss. And if you add in way too many configuration changes, event types, layers, buttons to click, you can't get to that 1091 number and focus in on that 10%. So it's a balance, but I think with technology, you can help meet those requirements without putting undue work, undue pressure, and complexity on your end users and your field teams out there from a retail perspective.
Absolutely. The most important are obviously the video evidence, LPR evidence that you may have, as well as the written statement from, those are the most important pieces. The reporting piece of it is something we can do and we can accomplish without, putting that burden on the retailers.
100%. Perfect. Well, hey, Rob and Raul, we've talked a lot about the data network. We've talked a lot about, the impacts and how law enforcement and retail can help support each other even more to drive additional outcomes. There's obviously more coming in this space. I would say everyone listening in, keep an eye on this, make sure you see what we're going to be pushing forward, because I think it's going to make a very large difference in this fight against retail crime and this fight against crime in the communities. But I would love to just kind of pivot, and Raul, I'm going to start with you. And when we think about the future and the functionality and what we're looking at down the road, What excites you the most about the potential here, and individuals on the call should get excited about? What's your one or two things that you're looking forward to in the coming years?
Yeah, I'm focusing a lot on organized retail crime, obviously the task forces. So the dashboards are going to be really exciting as people start using dashboards to specifically address through jurisdiction restrictions and maybe operating more in that one or two particular state area that they're focusing on. The license plate program, as I keep calling it, license plate reader, where that goes for Auror as we start getting more retailers on the platform and identifying those vehicles of interest, kind of overlaying that with intelligence on the crews that are being targeted. Those are two things that really kind of get me excited. And then just last piece, real quick, before I turn it over to Rob, increasing the direct to police reporting, getting retailers comfortable with doing that and explaining that from the front end, so they don't have multiple months of why didn't we see those results because of the other retailer, and we come back to them, well, we've been using this initiative that's available to you right now, where we can send information direct to police and get a bigger impact, bigger engagement. Those are the things that I'm really excited about.
And Rob, before you jump in on what you're excited about, Raul, maybe just for everyone listening in, high level, explain what direct to police reporting is in the Auror platform and what that looks like for retailers and law enforcement.
Yeah, so basically what it comes down to is a retailer would have the ability to send their information, their reports, their statements of an incident of what's happening in their jurisdiction, pick a city, whatever name city in the United States that they're operating in, and have that directly report to a police department that they've pre-selected, everybody's good with it, then there's an email sent, and there's a messaging back and forth directly on that particular retailer and that's jurisdictional police department or sheriff's deputy, whatever it is. That's basically what it comes down to.
It's massive, right? From a retailer and putting my practitioner hat on, I can, a store, user, LP professional, whoever makes a report, the platform itself generates, the statement for them. All the evidence is in that evidence locker. And I can press a button on that event and say, send to, the New York Police Department or, Colorado Springs Police Department. And that police department, that agency gets that report with all of the data plus all the evidence. Yeah. It's streamlining a lot of that process, which I think goes back to, kind of Rob, your point at the beginning of, this is a retail crime was deprioritized, and it was deprioritized because of the lack of data flowing and the lack of data being accepted by law enforcement. And so this is a good tool that retailers have today to help drive that data, to help drive that reporting, and to help get the visibility to what's actually happening on the front line. So yeah, awesome, Raul. Yeah.
That point, Bobby, was probably the most important. The fact that they establish a communication with somebody that's not just being reported and that there's responsibility between that police department and that retailer where they have open communication that this is happening, in my professional opinion, creates those walls to be dropped, and you start building that community of network to share more and feel uncomfortable, where then it becomes comfortable as you're building these cases.
Awesome. Raul, thank you. Rob, over to you. What excites you for the future in this space? Yeah.
A couple things. I think the combination of where we're going with LPR, many of our retail partners are deploying LPR. Of course, LPR has been around for a while in state and local law enforcement. I think a super powerful combination is that private-public partnership where we can take retail data and law enforcement data and bring them together. Much more powerful than just having street-level LPR data when you can combine it all. For the retail side, for example, being able to locate missing and exploited children, being able to know when a violent offender has entered the parking lot. For law enforcement, being able to see, where stolen vehicles are being parked at, and just a combination of all of that data coming together. The other really important one for me is expanding to other crimes, taking the technologies that we have on the retail side and expanding it out. Some of our image matching capabilities, our LPR capabilities, they clearly have applicability beyond the retail side, but that comes with the success of the retail side. So we've got to get that right first. And just to circle around a couple of questions that came in, lots of federal dollars coming into the space right now in ORC. And the question was, do I see local law enforcement engaging the same way the federal partners are? And I would say, locals are going to follow where the money is. So now that there's funding coming in, they're going to get a lot more excited I would also encourage all of our retail partners to ask their law enforcement, are you on Auror and are you using it? And again, it's no cost to law enforcement to use and to get into those evidence lockers and download that information. So encouraging them to use it. Feel free to pass out my name, and I'm happy to get them connected as well in there. And then one of the other questions, Bobby, was just how to deal with a law enforcement that's not engaging. I think that's really show them that there's quality data and that there is actionable data. And then if they're not responding, unfortunately, I think it's nag them with 911 until they do respond. But giving them good information is what I think will get law enforcement more engaged.
Yeah. And I'll jump in there real quick. One prime example was a retailer investigator taking the time in their city, sitting down with the detective who's working property crimes, organized retail crime, whatever it was, and then just going through the platform and teaching each other about who they're targeting. So that was an example, Bobby, that I just got from a couple of weeks ago, where we're finding these incredible things just outside of an official task force. The retailer taking care of the retailer and saying, you know what, I'm going to walk them through what we're seeing, and getting the willingness of that police department, that sheriff's deputies, to sit there and say, oh my Lord, I've been looking at these folks for a while. I could not tie them into multiple jurisdictions. You have this data? Yep. How do we set it up? Let's go talk to a prosecutor and let's see if we can get a charge either through the state or through federal.
And Raul, I think that's just a tag on that a little bit. I think that's a great point to one of the other questions that was asked, how to deal with a repeat offender. It's all about showing the volume and showing the impact. So going to law enforcement or going to a prosecutor and saying what looks like a single offense is actually 25 offenses in the last 90 days and showing that data, they will pick up on that and they will action on that. The other advantage that we have in Auror is we can see across multiple retailers where retailers may not be talking to each other. We can see that the same person is offending in 3 or 4 different retailers and present that information as well.
Awesome. Rob and Raul, appreciate that. Thank you for listening to the Retail Crime Intelligence Podcast by Auror. Don't forget to follow and subscribe on your favorite podcast app.